In the spring of 1871, a construction foreman named Walter Eads broke through a brick wall 12 feet below the surface of a demolition site on Dearborn Street in Chicago and stepped into a room that was not on any blueprint his company had been given. The room was approximately 30 feet square. The ceiling was intact. The floor had been laid with cut stone. 3 doorways led to corridors that ran in separate directions and disappeared beyond the reach of his lantern. Eads spent 11 minutes inside before his foreman's instinct told him to leave. He filed a written account with the site owner the following morning. The site owner forwarded it to the city engineer's office. The city engineer's office acknowledged receipt. No excavation was authorized, no follow-up inspection was conducted, the wall was resealed. That account sits in the Chicago Historical Society's archive under a miscellaneous construction correspondence file dated 1871. It has been there for over 150 years. It has never been cited in any official account of Chicago's subsurface history. And what makes it significant is not that it is unique. It is that it is one of dozens of accounts from dozens of American cities describing the same encounter, a construction crew, a sealed lower level, an institutional response that amounts to the same thing every time. Seal it back, file the report, move on. This is not a coincidence isolated to one city. It is a pattern that runs from Boston to San Francisco, from New Orleans to St. Louis. And the question that pattern raises, why, in city after city, century after century, the official response to discovering a buried structural level has been to close it rather than investigate it, has never been answered by any municipal government in the United States. A construction supervisor named Bernard Alcott, working on a sewer line replacement project in St. Louis in 1908, broke through a mortared stone wall at a depth of 18 feet on a section of 4th Street and found a corridor running east that his crew followed for approximately 60 feet before the passage narrowed beyond practical entry. Alcott reported the discovery to the city's sewer department. A department inspector visited the site, examined the corridor entrance, and filed an assessment noting that the construction materials were inconsistent with any documented St. Louis utility installation and appeared to predate the city's earliest recorded infrastructure. The assessment recommended that the city's historical society be notified. The historical society was notified. A representative visited the site 14 days later, by which time the sewer project had been completed and the corridor entrance had been sealed with concrete as part of the standard backfill procedure. The Historical Society representative noted in his visit report that access was no longer possible and that the matter would need to be revisited during any future excavation in the area. No future excavation in that area has been documented as revisiting it. Before we go further, if investigations like this are what you come here for, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. To understand why sealed lower levels exist beneath American cities and why the institutional response to finding them has been so consistently incurious, we have to go back to the period of American urban development that most city histories treat as a beginning, and that the physical evidence beneath those cities suggests was anything but. The standard account of American urban development begins in the 17th and 18th centuries with the founding of colonial settlements, Boston in 1630, Philadelphia in 1682, New Orleans in 1718. These settlements are described as built on undeveloped land, their infrastructure constructed from scratch, their street grids laid out by surveyors working on clean ground. The history books present a picture of cities rising from nothing. What the subsurface archaeological record of those same cities' presence is considerably more complicated. Boston is the most thoroughly documented case. When the city began its extensive subway construction in 1895, the first subway system in the United States, the engineering crews encountered at multiple points along the route structural elements that predated the colonial founding of the city by a margin the supervising engineers could not explain. Cut stone foundations at depths inconsistent with any documented colonial construction. Drainage channels whose orientation and dimensions did not correspond to any known utility installation in the city's archive. Brick courses using a bonding pattern that the city's own Historical Preservation Office, when consulted in 1897, stated it could not match to any identified construction tradition in the colonial or pre-colonial record. The chief engineer of the Boston Elevated Railway, a man named Howard Carson, who oversaw the 1895 excavations, filed a detailed internal report documenting 17 specific anomalous structural discoveries along the Tremont Street subway corridor. Carson's report recommended a formal archaeological survey of the anomalous sites before construction proceeded. The recommendation was not acted upon. Construction proceeded. Carson's report remained in the railway's internal archive until the company's dissolution, at which point its records were transferred to the Massachusetts State Archive. Carson himself was a meticulous documentarian whose other engineering reports from the same period are detailed, technically rigorous, and publicly available in the archive. He was not a man who exaggerated or speculated beyond his evidence. His report on the anomalous structural discoveries is described in the archive's own inventory as a 17-page document with photographic plates. 17 pages and photographs. That is a substantial, formal document produced by a chief engineer describing specific structural discoveries at specific locations along a specific corridor. Its inaccessibility since 1987 is not explained by the complexity of the material or the difficulty of preservation. Photographs from the 1890s have been successfully digitized by archives across the country. The document is listed. It is described. It is simply not available. The anomalous structure report is listed in the State Archives inventory. When researchers request it, they are told it is held in an off-site storage facility pending digitization. It has been pending digitization since 1987. New Orleans presents a different but equally consistent pattern. The city sits at or below sea level across most of its developed area, and its subsurface conditions, waterlogged, unstable, subject to continuous settling, have historically made deep excavation both difficult and dangerous. When excavations have been attempted, however, the results have repeatedly generated reports that the city's official archaeological record has declined to incorporate. A drainage improvement project conducted in 1903 through the French Quarter encountered, at a depth of approximately 14 feet, a continuous stone surface running beneath a 3-block section of Chartres Street that the supervising engineer, a man named Armand Turreau, described in his project log as too regular and too extensive to be a natural deposit. Turreau noted the surface's presence, recorded its approximate dimensions, and continued the drainage work. His project log is held in the New Orleans Notarial Archive. The stone surface he described has never been the subject of any subsequent investigation. In Philadelphia, a water main replacement project conducted in 1931 on a section of Arch Street near the old city centre broke through what workers described as a vaulted ceiling at a depth of 16 feet. The vault below was empty, dry, and ran for an undetermined distance to the north. The project foreman, a man named Joseph Callahan, halted work and contacted the city's water department. The water department contacted the city's historical commission. The historical commission sent a representative who spent 40 minutes in the vault and filed a written assessment stating that the structure appeared to be of considerable age and warranted further investigation. Further investigation was never authorized. The water main was rerouted around the vault's perimeter. Callahan's incident report and the Historical Commission's assessment are both held in the Philadelphia City Archives Public Works Collection. The vault itself has not been entered by any documented party since 1931. Seattle's case is the most extensively documented and the most deliberately managed. Following the Great Fire of 1889, the city raised its street level by as much as 32 feet in some areas of the downtown core, burying the original ground floor of every building in the affected zone. The original storefronts, sidewalks, utility connections, and structural foundations of pre-fire Seattle were sealed beneath the new street grade. In 1907, the city officially closed public access to the underground spaces, citing public health concerns related to rodent infestation and standing water. Before closure, a city-commissioned inventory of the underground spaces was begun by a clerk named Arthur Denny Jr., who was tasked with cataloguing the contents and structural condition of accessible underground sections. Denny completed approximately 40% of the inventory before the closure order took effect. His partial inventory documented, among other items, a series of lower-level spaces accessible from the already buried original ground floor, spaces that lay below the pre-fire street level predating the 1889 construction, whose origin and purpose his inventory described as undetermined. Denny's partial inventory was filed with the city clerk's office in 1907. The portion of the inventory covering the subground floor spaces has not been located in the city's archive. The portion covering the original ground floor level exists and is publicly accessible. The lower section does not. The boundary between the accessible portion of Denny's inventory and the missing portion falls precisely at the point where his documentation shifts from describing the sealed original ground floor storefronts, the level that is now offered to tourists as the Seattle Underground, to describing the spaces he found below that level. Everything above that line is preserved and publicly accessible. Everything below it is gone. That line is not a product of differential preservation. Paper does not selectively decay based on the content of what is written on it. The division is precise, categorical, and falls exactly where it would fall if someone had made a deliberate decision about what should remain in the record and what should not. The pattern is consistent across every city where sufficient documentation survives to trace it. A construction or utility crew encounters a structural anomaly at depth. The anomaly is reported through official channels. An official representative examines it and recommends further investigation. Further investigation is never authorized. The report disappears into an archive where it is technically accessible but functionally invisible, listed in an inventory, located in an off-site facility, pending a digitization project that has been pending for decades. The consistency of the institutional response across these cases is what demands explanation. These were not coordinated decisions made by a single authority. Boston, New Orleans, Philadelphia, Seattle to St. Louis, and Chicago are governed by separate municipal administrations, served by separate archives, staffed by separate bureaucracies with no formal connection to one another. Yet the response to anomalous subsurface discoveries in each of these cities follows the same sequence: discovery, official acknowledgement, recommendation for further investigation, failure to act on that recommendation, and documentation that is either missing, inaccessible, or stripped of its most significant content. The uniformity of that sequence across independent jurisdictions is not the product of coincidence. It is the product of a consistent institutional priority, the priority of continued development over archaeological examination, enforced not through formal policy but through the accumulated weight of individual decisions, each of which was locally rational, and collectively produced a national pattern of subsurface suppression. Municipal governments across the United States have never collectively explained why the discovery of pre-existing subsurface structures beneath their cities consistently generates a response of closure and non-investigation rather than archaeological examination. They have never explained why the official archaeological records of American cities, records that document in exhaustive detail the material, culture of colonial and post-colonial periods, contain almost no documentation of structural discoveries made during the intensive utility and subway construction of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a period during which virtually every major American city was excavating its own subsurface to depths never previously reached. They have never explained why the engineering reports from that construction period, which documented the subsurface conditions encountered in clinical technical detail for purposes of project management, consistently omit or minimize structural anomalies that the same engineers noted in their internal project logs. Why does every American city that undertook deep subsurface construction between 1880 and 1940 have a gap between its internal engineering records and its publicly archived construction documentation? A gap that consistently occurs in the portions of those records describing anomalous structural discoveries. Why are the specific files that document anomalous subsurface findings Carson's report in Boston, Turo's project log in New Orleans, Callahan's incident report in Philadelphia, Denny's lower inventory section in Seattle, either missing, held in inaccessible off-site storage, or stripped of their most significant content before entering the public archive. Why? When modern construction projects in these same cities encounter subsurface anomalies at depth, are those anomalies consistently handled through project-level decisions, rerouting, resealing, working around, rather than through the formal archaeological review process that city ordinances in every one of these jurisdictions technically require? The legal framework for protecting subsurface archaeological discoveries during construction has existed in most American cities since the 1960s. Under that framework, a construction crew that encounters a structural anomaly of potential historical significance is required to halt work and notify the relevant historical authority. The notification requirement exists. The review process exists. The enforcement mechanism is rarely triggered because the decision about whether a discovery constitutes a historical anomaly significant enough to trigger the process is made at the project level by the construction supervisor and the project manager, whose professional incentive is to keep the project on schedule, not to initiate a review that could halt it for months. The foreman seals it back. The report goes in the file, the building goes up, and the thing that was found stays where it was found, sealed back into the earth, one level below the official record of what the city knows is down there. These questions do not go away because municipal archives are poorly organized. The pattern of missing documentation is too consistent, too specifically targeted at anomalous subsurface discoveries, and too uniform across too many independent jurisdictions to be the product of ordinary institutional negligence. Ordinary institutional negligence produces random gaps. What the subsurface records of American cities show is not random gaps. It is systematic absence in one specific category of finding. The sealed rooms, the vaulted ceilings, the cut stone surfaces, and the structural levels that predate the official founding dates of the cities built above them are still down there every day. Millions of Americans walk above these sealed levels without any awareness that they exist. In Boston, commuters on the Green Line passed directly over the anomalous foundations that Howard Carson documented in 1895 and recommended for archaeological survey. In New Orleans, residents and tourists walk Chartres Street above a continuous stone surface that Armand Turow noted in 1903, and that no archaeologist has examined since. In Philadelphia, office workers in buildings on Arch Street are separated from a dry, intact vault of undetermined age by a concrete water main rerouting that Joseph Callahan ordered in 1931. None of these people have been told. None of the cities above these sealed levels have made any public announcement that anomalous pre-existing structures exist beneath their streets. The official position of every American municipal government regarding its own subsurface is that the archaeological record has been adequately examined and that construction activity has been managed in compliance with historical preservation requirements. That position is maintained in the face of engineering logs, project reports, and archive inventories that document, in the engineer's own words, the discovery of things that position cannot accommodate. In Boston, the anomalous foundations along the Tremont Street corridor are still beneath the subway that was built over them in 1895. In New Orleans, the stone surface on Chartres Street is still beneath the drainage infrastructure that was built around it in 1903. In Philadelphia, the vault on Arch Street is still there, sealed since 1931, dry, accessible from the rerouted water main that runs along its perimeter. In Seattle, whatever Arthur Denny Jr. found below the pre-fire street level is still below the original ground floor that tourists walk through on the underground tour, one level above, but sealed from it by a closure order that has been in continuous effect for over 100 years. The official history tells us that American cities were built on undeveloped land by documented founders in documented periods, and that their subsurface holds nothing that the official record has not already accounted for. What the engineering logs, project reports, and archive inventories of those same cities tell us is that the men who dug beneath them found things that the official record was not prepared to account for, and that the institutional response in city after city, generation after generation, was to seal those things back up and file the paperwork somewhere it would not be easily found. These records survive because people refuse to stop asking. If this matters to you, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. History does not disappear when it is buried. It disappears when no one looks for it. Next week, I am pulling a thread that connects the sealed lower levels of 4 American cities to a single federal survey conducted in 1934 by the Public Works Administration, which sent engineers into the subsurface of 12 major cities as part of a Depression-era infrastructure assessment. The survey produced a consolidated report. The consolidated report was submitted to the Interior Department. The Interior Department's archive lists it. When researchers request it, they are told it was transferred to the National Archive in 1952. The National Archive has no record of receiving it.